All right. Hello and welcome to the AI Mistakes channel. Listen, every week I take the time to put together a great presentation that covers topics in AI. And boy, have I got a good one today. There's some really fascinating things that are happening in the world of AI. And there's literally research that is published on a daily basis. Really fascinating things that we can learn, and we're going to talk about some of those fascinating new things that we can learn about today. But before I do that, I want to get into it a little bit and talk about it from the standpoint of AI mistakes. I mean, after all, that is the name of the channel. It wouldn't be fair if I weren't covering the ways that AI was making mistakes and trying to have fun with that idea in general. Well, look, we've been around AI for quite a long time. In fact, a lot of folks might not even realize it, but the early days of the iPhone autocorrect was actually a form of artificial intelligence. And there was a lot of really funny circumstances that came across using a tool like autocorrect on the iPhone when you were messaging with your friends and family. And there were some really funny situations that came up. Well, on that note, we understand that mistakes can be made when AI is involved. And in particular, even the producers of these chatbots have made it abundantly clear that that is a risk, that that is a thing that goes on. In fact, if you've ever looked closely, here's a snapshot of ChatGPT saying at the very bottom where you enter your message, ChatGPT can make mistakes. In fact, this is not even an exceptional circumstance. What is a little funny, and where would we be without having a little bit of fun with the idea of mistakes? I took a chance and asked Claude, hey, what's the worst mistake you've ever made? And ironically, Claude was a little mistaken in that the response was, I don't actually experience mistakes, which is totally untrue because what do you see at the very bottom of the screen? Claude can make mistakes. Noticing a theme yet? Well, it turns out that virtually any well-known, high-quality AI, generative AI solution that uses a large language model behind the scenes has the potential for mistakes to be made. And that's an artifact largely of the incredible amounts of information that are used to train these large language models. In fact, the larger the model is, the more often it's likely that there's going to be some sort of a problem or confusion in the response that is made, because there is an incredible amount of information that is used to train these models. We're talking about terabytes and petabytes and trillions upon trillions of tokens, bits of information that are used to inform these systems. But these systems still have an incredible amount of utility. So the right choice here was for these organizations to say, look, there could be mistakes that are being made, but there's a lot of value here. And that is a foundational basis that I have for creating this very channel and having this discussion with you, because there's a lot of really great value, but there's also situations where things can go horribly wrong. And that's one of the things that I wanted to talk about tonight. Microsoft did a very bold thing a number of years ago. In fact, it was quite a long time ago. All the way back in 2016, Microsoft was toying with this idea of enabling you and I to work with a chatbot, to have a conversation, to do something that was a little more multidimensional than simply interacting with a computer in a very predictable way. And the way that they did this is they used a Twitter account and they created what we now know is Microsoft's Tay. Unfortunately, there were people involved, and part of the interactions that the bot had was that it would learn from them. It would actually take information in and incorporate that in the way that it was giving answers. That made it more conversational and interesting. Unfortunately, because many people involved were trying to manipulate or really create a problem for the bot by testing it, because who doesn't like a good test? I mean, we're all about benchmarks in the AI space because people want to test it. They want to understand, what is this thing capable of? And inevitably, there was some foul language used and some that were brought into the mix. And as a result, Microsoft had to pull Tay because it was actually a really horrible outcome. Now, who's to blame for that? Was it Microsoft's mistake for releasing Microsoft Tay for the world to play with and learn from? I don't think so, actually. In fact, if anything, I want to praise Microsoft for taking the risk and putting this out there to run this experiment, because we learned a great deal from the mistakes that were made in producing Tay. And if you go back and look at all of the work that's been done over the last several years since Microsoft released Tay, it really does show that Microsoft learned a lot of important lessons and it really incorporated that in what they're producing. Now, to be clear, none of these chatbots are perfect, and that continues to be the overall theme. There are things that can go horribly wrong in the responses, and it does happen. But it's also possible that one of the reasons things go horribly wrong is really around us. And what I want to share with you today is that there are active things that you and I can do to improve the results that we're getting from the interactions with these large language models. I'm going to have to spend a ton of time on this tonight, but what I want to impress upon you is that you have more control over these large language models and the way that they respond to you than you might at first expect. Now, most of us are familiar with the direct chatbot interface. You go to ChatGPT by going to chat.openai.com, and you're able to have a chat session there with many of the GPTs, or just the straight up chat interface where you type in the box and it gives you a response. For the average person, that is your impression of interacting with these large language models. But did you know that there's actually a lot more to it than that? And what's happening over the last many months is many people are building applications and leveraging the capabilities in tools like the GPT model to integrate into their application so that you can do more advanced things. In fact, one of the real benefits of the technology is that we can take the intelligence in these AI models and inject it directly into a process. And we're able to create more value with that because, let's just be honest, we can type things into ChatGPT and we can copy and paste, and that works pretty well. In fact, that's a really great way to get started because you can find the thing that you need quickly in the chat interface and take it to whichever application might be useful to you. But the real utility and value that we're starting to see evolve this year is taking these responses, these interrogations, these sessions that we do, and putting it into a useful format, building it into a process that we've already got. So not only are we getting an intelligent response, but it's put in exactly the place where we need it to. So the people that are doing this kind of work are leveraging what's called an API. That's an advanced programming interface. And what the API does is it allows you to create a series of responses and connect that series of responses directly into your application. Now, this is a more advanced topic, and I'm not going to go into development work and how to do that today, but there are a couple of things that I want to share with you before I move on with the regular discussion. The first is a lot of people are scared by this idea of coding, but one of the wonderful things that is really happening with the advent of generative AI is there are more opportunities for people that have never written a line of code in their life to interact with code, to learn how to write code, and to even build solutions that don't require very much coding at all. Low code and no code solutions are allowing more people to have access to these capabilities and to bring them into their processes in new ways. Even companies like Microsoft have had products that allow you to integrate and automate tasks And increasingly, we're seeing AI injected into those processes. Now, behind the scenes, when you're incorporating AI responses and using an API or some sort of automation to bring that in, there are some controls that are available on the back end. And in the case of OpenAI and their GPT model capabilities, they actually have a setting in the playground that allows you to adjust the temperature. Now, what the temperature controls actually is the unpredictability of the model. And so as you raise the temperature, what happens is that the model becomes less predictive and more wild in its responses. Now, you can also turn down the temperature so that it is only giving very predictable responses. And that is one of the ways that the wild behaviors can be reduced. We talk about this concept of hallucinations. That's when the model is introducing things that are not factual or are not verifiable in the data set or the question that is being asked. And we can help to reduce those hallucinations by adjusting the temperature to keep it closer to a more predictable value. So this actually is a lever that we have to pull. Unfortunately, it's more difficult to use this kind of option in most of the popular chat interfaces. But if you're using some other tools, it is possible to directly access the temperature and take advantage of that for your responses. So if you're trying to build a solution or incorporate AI, there are a number of options, and you might consider getting more deeply involved with the API configuration so that you can better control those responses and take advantage of the levers that are made available. But temperature settings are not the only way that we can do this. One of the amazing things that we've seen develop over the last year is solutions that allow you to bring in external data sets and then use prompt engineering to inform and instruct the model to only use the information that is contained in those ancillary documents in answering the solution. In previous discussions on the channel, we've talked about many ways that you can leverage RAG and prompt engineering. One of my favorite daily AI tools is perplexity.ai because it is a form of RAG. It's actually doing an internet search to find relevant documents to answer your query, and then it is using the information that is inside those search results to compose a large language model, well-written response to your question. And in my case, I often even run recent news related queries in Perplexity because I can get a quick answer to a much more complicated situation, and it's backed by information that has been published in other places. Now, none of these sources is perfect, and even a tool like Perplexity, with as good as it is not perfect. And so you do have to check your responses and be sure that the information you're sourcing is accurate. But most of the time, we just need a quick and dirty answer. In those situations that we need something a little more precise or valuable, it is important not to rely 100% on the large language model's answer because it is possible for those mistakes to be injected. And that's where we have to talk about some more advanced solutions. And what we've seen is as the models have increased the context window, we have seen a dramatic improvement in the reliability of the answers because we can now source entire large documents in the prompt that is submitted. When we're able to submit all of that information in a single prompt, we can actually ask the model to only use the information that is in the prompt that we've submitted. So with the likes of Google Gemini, where if you are leveraging their cloud control panel, you can actually access over 1 million tokens. That form of a token is a likeness to words, but it's not exactly words. You could place some very large bodies of text in there and have it answer only from the document. And then you're using the large language model to enable that response because it can compose the answer from the thoughts that are in those documents. So we are seeing that those kinds of strange aberrations like hallucinations and incorrect responses are being reduced also by large context windows. Now, the challenge with a large context window, of course, is that you have to put the entirety of the information that you need into that window that you're submitting the question to. And you'll have to resubmit that information every time you want to ask a follow-up. So it is a very compute intensive process. And if you're paying by the token, as you are with most of the solutions that allow you to incorporate them from an API perspective or on a pay by the query basis, that's going to be an extraordinarily expensive endeavor after only a few attempts at doing it. But in some cases, the ability to get accurate information and know with 100% certainty that you're getting a response that is sourced from a reliable piece of information may very well be worth the extended cost of submitting all of those tokens and having the many tokens returned in that response. So that's really the second way that we've seen that we can improve the answers and prevent real problems and big mistakes. Now, here's another interesting one, and I did a fairly popular video for my channel several weeks ago on prompt hacking, the ways that you can actually manipulate the response and the query to the large language model to have it do something that is not entirely intended by the people that own and run these large models. And that is both a good thing and a bad thing. On the one hand, that they are including some guardrails and really instructing the model to behave in a certain way in the responses is an important development that we will need to continue to evolve. But also sometimes, let's just be honest, really strange things can happen in those responses. And at least in my own experiences, I've been kind of frustrated at times, particularly by ChatGPT's refusal to do what I've asked it to do. And that is, in my view, a horrible behavior because oftentimes I'm not asking it to do something that should be hitting any guardrails at all, but it simply refuses to give you the response. Oftentimes, you'll encounter this kind of error with generating an image with DALL-E via ChatGPT. You'll ask it for something, and for some reason, it's triggered a guardrail that makes it think that you're trying to ask for a trademark or some sort of proprietary protected property, and they need to avoid the legal circumstances around taking someone's brand, trademark, or otherwise copyrighted work. And that's an important thing to consider as well. There's a lot of debate that's happening around copyright and ownership, what it means to have intellectual property in the age of these kinds of tools. And so it's sort of a necessary evil that we have to put up with. You can use some local models to sidestep the issue. You have models that are available that are, in fact, totally unlocked and open for people to manipulate. And that, too, is its own set of problems. So there are many ways that you can get around it. But even models like a ChatGPT, there are prompt hacking practices that you can bring in that will actually allow you to sidestep the guardrails. And this is a known problem that is encountered. And I think that we are already in the process of developing solutions that can avoid these kinds of issues. In fact, one of the more recent advents is actually using a large language model to inspect the prompt and search for these kinds of hacks that allow you to sidestep the guardrails. But these are very much under development and not quite ready for prime time yet. But I think we're going to see a lot more in this space where we are using more and more intelligent solutions to identify where things are being bypassed or we're working outside of the intended controls of the system. But this is a way that you can do it. So let me encourage you to go back and look at the video where I covered some of the prompt hacking details. And look, there's new ones that are discovered all the time. And if that's something you're interested in, those most recent developments, let me know. Let me hear from you in the comments. That's something you'd like to hear more about. Maybe it's time for an update already, even though it's only been a few weeks. But we can use various prompting techniques to really improve our result. And there are many discoveries that have been made. I think prompt engineering is still very much a thing today because anytime a human is actually entering something into the keyboard, there is some necessary thought that you need to put into that prompt. So what kind of things can we do? Well, there are so many different methods for prompt engineering, but they really all boil down to one very important concept, and that is that we need to be providing context to the model. the more context we can give the model on the kind of answer that we want it to give, the better the answer is going to be. Now, it may not be perfect simply by doing some prompt engineering, but simply giving an instruction to the model that says something to the effect of, answer this question and only use the data that I've given you to answer the question. Or you need to source your answer from these attached documents. Or you will only use quoted responses in order to answer the question. This does bear fruit, and it does lead to some significant improvements in the amount of hallucinations that are returned in the responses. This is particularly valuable in tools like where you're doing code generation, because if you're asking the large language model to write the code for you, you want it to be accurate code, you want it to be good code, and that may mean that you have to rely upon some much more stringent rules for building that response. But in addition to providing context, we have constant new research that's helping us identify new ways that we can actually improve the responses. So this paper was released not that long ago, March of 2024. It's not a very big paper, but they're using a new mechanism called recursive chain of feedback. Now, what's interesting is there's been some developments in the space, and they're continuing to build on top of what is already available. So we'll cover this in more detail in a minute. But before we get there, just a quick reminder, there are all sorts of really wonderful ways that you can think through the prompts that you are writing. Structured prompting techniques are really useful in informing how we think about what it is that we want the machine to do in responding to us. In fact, it turns out that the more clear in thought we can be about what it is that we want by using structures to develop the inputs that we're giving to the large language model, the better the outputs are going to be, because it's providing additional context. If you're providing role information and you're giving it inspiration and some details of what you want the results to be, that can be really powerful. In fact, some of the responses that you can plug in here from a structure standpoint is telling it what kind of mode of operation you want it to be in. What level do you want the response to be in? Maybe you're in an academic setting and it needs to be a highly academic response. Or maybe you're having a conversation with your 13-year-old and it needs to be at a 7th grade level. These are things to take into consideration when you write the prompts. And so you can tell it exactly what kind of style you want, what kind of general feeling. Maybe there's an element of emotion that you can include that also informs the model on how it should be brought together. Now, we've seen other tools in the prompting like step-by-step and chain of thought. And of course, having a continuous question and answer interview is really useful, because you can ask it a question, and if it doesn't respond in a way that is a complete response, or that does not answer it in the way you were looking for, you can simply continue the conversation and say, well, that's not exactly what I was looking for. What if you also include this concept in constructing a response? And it's going to use that additional information, the additional context, to improve the answer. Well, prompt engineering has been something that many people have been spending a great deal of time on, and there's already some wonderful new frameworks and tools that are allowing the improvement, even so much so that we're able to leverage a large language model to do some amount of analysis of the prompt and provide improved prompts. And in the paper that we're going to talk about, the authors have made a few statements that I wanted to pull out. Look, many studies have shown some really good improvements in results. One of the best things that we've discovered is to break down complex problems, to say things like think it through step by step, or even provide the breakdown in the original prompt. See, just like us, because look, the large language models are using the human as a basis to even design things like the models. I mean, the inspiration for neural networks comes literally from kind of reverse engineering the brain and trying to understand how does the brain work, and then using that to build a mathematical model that can use all of the information that we have available to us to compose the response. By putting those breakdowns into the process and using that as a part of the context, the model is actually able to do a better job. In the earlier days of ChatGPT, one of the early discoveries was it wasn't very good at math. Now, to be honest, asking a large language model to multiply 5 by 12 is something you can do with ChatGPT, but it's not a particularly good use of resources because, look, we have calculators. We really don't need a large language model to be doing math like that. But also, it's a very poor use of resources because running these models is a very compute intensive operation. So, one, don't ask it to multiply, but two, if you want it to give you an accurate answer, you can actually say, break the problem down and think it through step by step. And you will get a more accurate answer because you've provided additional context to the model. Now, this idea of sort of creating a revision is something that they're suggesting in their paper. So they're suggesting to take a new direction in solving the complex problem by breaking down the original problem into subcomponents. And they're using this idea of chain of feedback. Now, this is an idea that's been around for a little while, but now they've added this concept of recursion to the process. And that basically is taking the problem and breaking it down more. Now, we've had this concept of recursion that's well known in the mathematical space. And if you've taken any intensive programming courses, even really the 1000 level of programming in a language like C++, you've probably come across this idea of recursion. And recursion is a really useful set of instructions. You can basically break down a problem into smaller parts and create a sort of looping mechanism where it will break the problem down until it gets to no smaller parts. And then each of those smaller parts returns an answer, and that answer flows back up through the process to deliver the final result. So using this idea of recursion with a chain of feedback mechanism is what this paper discusses. And they found that it actually did bear some fruit. So here is the essence of the algorithm, and it's done in a more mathematical fashion. But basically what they've done is they've created a function that will take a problem as input, and it will specify that the reasoning steps and final solution are what is desired as the output. And then they're using this response checking mechanism to say, have we broken this down enough? No, let's do it some more. Let's do it some more. Let's do it some more. And the reason that they kept going into this research was that they discovered that when you and I are at that chat interface and we ask it a question and it comes back with an answer that's not very good, we might simply say, no, that's not right. Try again. The problem with that is that it doesn't add additional context to the model. And what they discovered in their early research was the answers actually were not getting better because there was no additional context or information that was useful in the response where you said, no, that wasn't the answer I was looking for. Now, the reality is if you're just having a quick chat session, it is really easy just to simply say no. Oftentimes, I've gone back to my question and resubmitted it or tweaked the response a little bit rather than continuing the session because I like being able to get it in one shot. But what they've discovered really comes through in their research here is that if you can ask the model to break the problem down a little bit better, you'll actually get a better response out of the model. And so I think what we're going to see as this process continues to evolve is really a coming together of many of these different processes. Now, what's interesting is this paper is most recently released, and they're using the earlier ChatGPT model, the 3.5 model. In fact, this is not even the 3.5 turbo model that many of us are familiar with from the very early days. OpenAI did an update in 2023 for the turbo model because it was able to respond faster and the model had some time updates, just general improvements. These tests were conducted on ChatGPT 3.5, and there's a variety of reasons that papers are using the earlier models for these kinds of responses. They didn't really get into it in what I read in the paper, but the important thing is that they were able to improve the accuracy of the results by incorporating this RCOF view and process. Now, their takeaway from here is that they did make some improvements. They also indicated that there are other fields of research that are relevant, in particular prompt engineering and error correcting. So maybe this is one of the ways that we can improve what we're doing. Not only are we giving context in our initial query, but we're also breaking the problem down when it doesn't give us the right answer. In fact, most often when I've gotten an incorrect answer, I either forgot to break the problem down or I wasn't clear in my initial instructions. Now, is this going to fix every problem you can ever have? Are we still going to have horrible issues that come up? Well, yes. But again, having the conversation can help us correct it. And look, here's where the rubber meets the road on these kinds of things. The takeaway here isn't that we're not going to be able to fix any and every problem, because the truth is AI has a tremendous amount of value to provide. And here's an excerpt from a report. There was a number of academic institutions that got together and they worked with a consulting company called BCG. And BCG is well known for hiring the best of the best to be analysts and employees to do really amazing consulting work and help organizations improve what they do. And the results from this investigation basically showed that the outputs from those people that were using AI were tremendously better, because they were able to leverage the best of the AI model, and using their brain, they were able to pick out the good things. And what we see in this graph is really two important takeaways for you. One, not using versus using is dramatically an improvement. But I want to point out this little red area down here at the very beginning. That little red area, that's where a human typed a query into a large language model and asked it to give it a response. And then they took whatever it said. They just took it. They didn't change it. They didn't think about it. They didn't really consider the response at all. They just assumed that it was correct and took it for whatever it was they want to do. That was a really bad outcome. And so the truth is, we need to be using these tools, but we need to not turn the brain off. Use what you've got, because you can get a muchly improved result. It can help you do a better job of composing whatever it is that you're working on, leading to better outcomes. And we can take advantage of these incredible tools that are available and improve. So that's what I have to share with you today. Look, I really enjoy spending time going through these things, talking about the latest new things in artificial intelligence. I have the benefit of going to spend a bunch of time next week traveling, helping organizations to understand the power of generative AI and how incorporating that with all sorts of existing processes and information can really reap some tremendous benefits for those organizations. I haven't quite figured out what I'm going to do for next week, so bear with me as I sort out how to do travel while continuing to bring you this great information. I'll probably choose a different time to go live, perhaps even while I am traveling. I'll be able to put it together. If not, it may be very late when we do the video again next week. But look, if there's something you're interested in that I'm not talking about, I'd love to hear from you. If you are enjoying this, hey, let me hear from you. And if you're finding it at all valuable, let me just ask you, give me the thumbs up, give me a share, help others to explore and learn about the world of AI mistakes, because we're in the early days. In fact, I was reading some information just earlier today that really indicated that only somewhere around 40% of people have even had a chance to play with these tools and experience what they can do. We have a long way to go and so many opportunities for leveraging AI to improve our situation. You can learn from it. You can use it to create new things. A lot of these models are scoring very well on benchmarks and tests, and often you'll discover that, particularly in places where you have no domain experience, the answers you get out of the large language models are as good as you might get from an expert. Now, it doesn't mean it's going to be perfect, and there is an element of experience that's involved. So you also have to get your hands dirty. You have to make those mistakes using these tools to understand their boundaries and limitations. The models make mistakes, but you and I need to go make mistakes so that we can learn and get better. Don't let the mistakes hold you back. Use them to your advantage. Look, if you get started on this tech now, you'll be an expert in a couple of years. And the last time I checked, there's a lot of companies looking for artificial intelligence expertise right now. And speaking of getting that expertise, got some things I've been working on, a couple of courses and some coaching offerings. So if you're interested in any of those things, let me hear from you. Maybe there's ways that we can work together. I can help you. Maybe there's an opportunity for us to work on a project or a program, or educate a group of people that you work with on a regular basis. There's so much value that we can reap from the benefits of AI. Let's go make some AI mistakes, and we'll see you next time.